Welcome to another author in Spotlight. And I've really been looking forward to this particular interview because a lot of times my authors are teaching me about the topics that are important to them. But in this case, this was a topic I was very, very familiar with because I think I fell into the category of what this particular author was trying to teach all of us. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let me start by welcoming Alexandra Fleit. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So good to have you. So the title of your book is Sensitive is Not an Expletive, which is probably like the most provocative title I've ever heard. Uh, because to a lot of people, it is. To a lot of people, sensitivity, which is what you talk about, HSPs or people who are sensitive, are there's something wrong. There's something wrong with them, and there's something that needs to be fixed. And so, why don't we just have you start by telling us what is an HSP? How do you know you are one? And in particular, why has this been an expletive for so long?
Sure. So, an HSP, it's actually a term that was coined by a well-known psychologist named Dr. Elaine Aron. And it was actually in discovering and reading her book a number of years ago that I came to find a label or a way to name uh, something that was a really critical part of who I am, like my identity. And I'm a therapist, and I often emphasize with my clients you have to name the beast to tame the beast. Not that I want to frame sensitivity as something negative, but just kind of like the spirit of that. It's really helpful to gain an understanding and to just gain the language necessary to describe this whole phenomenon of sensitivity. And based on what I read in Dr. Aron's book, it's just about 18 to 20% of the population have more finely attuned nervous systems. And that just means that things hit us with a little bit more intensity than they would the average person. That includes like any form of stimuli, like sights, sounds, um, and emotionally too, we tend to have deep waters underneath the surface there. So that's a lot of what is covered in the book. Like that emotional sensitivity, I think, is the bulk of what I discuss there. And I think to answer the latter part of your question, like why it's an expletive, I think it just boils down to human nature. We often fear or recoil at things that we don't understand, or that we don't relate to. So a lot of times we come from all walks of life, right? Some of us are more emotionally attuned than others. Some of us are a little bit more emotionally stunted or simple in our makeup. So I think for those who don't really necessarily have the training or the emotional intelligence to appreciate that sort of attunement that sensitive people bring, it's just easier for them to label it or use an expletive to more easily dismiss it as something that's not important. And that what I've had to tell myself is that's just more a reflection of their limitation than my inadequacy.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up in an era where you weren't allowed to be sensitive. So a lot of people who meet me don't believe that I'm one of these highly sensitive people or a shy person or whatever phrase you want to use to describe it, because it was sort of like you said, it was treated like a negative. It was treated like an expletive. It was treated like a defect that needed to be cured. And so I guess what I would wonder is for people who are out there who have never heard this term before and have been looking for a way to explain why they feel like they feel and why they react like they do and why the world around them impacts them differently than it seems to be impacting other people, how would they know that this is something, for them to pay attention to, that they probably are a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, I think a big part of that would require embracing nuance and subtlety and a lot of self-compassion. Many times we can fall into a comparison trap as a way to determine if we are okay or if we fit within the norm. And that can be reassuring for a lot of us, especially if we are struggling with a sense of identity. So I think the first step would be just embracing that maybe I'm different, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. And something that's been really critical for me is replacing judgment with curiosity. You know, it's really hard to be judgmental and curious at the same time. And that was a key part of my own journey and learning more about sensitivities. Like, I'm going to stop, beating myself upside the head and punishing myself for being this way. And instead, I'm going to start asking, well, why am I like this? And is it necessarily a bad thing? Or is this something that I can leverage into a strength?
Yeah. One of the things you talk about in the book is sort of a continuum of sensitivity, so that there are people like me who are very mild. It's all internal. We feel the nervousness, we feel the need to withdraw, to retreat, to get like a quiet place and then kind of come back into the action. And then there are people who feel physically just overwhelmed by large crowds, by sudden sounds, things of that nature. Um, do you work with people who are on all areas of the continuum, and what should each of those people be doing? So if someone has a mild case of sensitivity versus someone who is crippled by it, are there different ways of sort of managing life?
Yeah. So I know Dr. Aaron has like a special certification for those who are like mental health clinicians and want to work with those people who identify as HSPs. Like, I personally haven't gotten it. And I have worked with some clients who have exhibited signs of sensitivity. And usually how it shows up is more more attuned or elevated levels of empathy. So I usually have to coach those clients on learning how to make that empathy work for them rather than against them, and not putting other people's comfort ahead of their own. But with respect to what you were saying about that continuum or that spectrum of sensitivity, like, that's absolutely true. And whether someone's more at the lesser side of the spectrum where they're like maybe not as sensitive, or if they're at the more extreme end, I think my advice would be the same, and it's just to find ways of coping that work for whatever part of the spectrum that you land. If you don't like sounds, or if loud noises, or if you have a very sensitive startle reflex, like having those noise canceling headphones or AirPods on hand. And if there are just certain environments that are completely triggering and most likely to make you unravel, if you can find a way to reduce the frequency that you're going to those places or find an alternative. But yeah, my advice would be the same, like, find a set of coping skills or a safety plan or a way to work with the sensitivity rather than against it.
Yeah. And you have a whole toolkit in the book that really does offer a plethora of ideas, suggestions, and strategies that people can try to manage their sensitivity. Not to cure it, because it's not a disease, right? We're not trying to fix it, but to actually help manage all of the things that are going on. We live in a world that is very, very unfriendly to sensitive people. I mean, as a mild case of HSP, I find the world to be deafening in its loudness, its brashness, and all of that. So I can only imagine what people who are farther on the other side of the spectrum are experiencing. But one of the things you sort of hint at in the book that I've been just dying to ask you about is, you do seem to suggest that there might be some connection between sympathy and sensitivity and creativity. That for some people, their sensitivity is rooted in this creative kind of vein that runs through them, and they need a different kind of level of focus that may explain their sensitivity. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. Something about sensitivity really lends itself well to accessing different creative avenues. And I think it just goes back to that enhanced perception that goes along with sensitivity, like what I mentioned earlier too about subtlety and nuance. Different forms of art, for example, different media that you can use for, creative self-expression. They do require a certain level of sensitivity because these are hard things to capture at times. Like sometimes we don't know how to express in words what we're feeling. But if we have a very rich inner world from being an HSP or a lot of like interiority,
Mhm.
then it makes it so that like creative pursuits like art and music are wonderful avenues that we can express ourselves creatively in a way that honors our sensitivity. And again, like to what you were saying, treats it as something that can be an asset rather than a weakness or a disease that needs to be cured.
Right, right. So let's switch gears for a moment and talk about the people who surround sensitive people, parents of sensitive children or spouses of sensitive people. If you happen to be someone who is very, very close to a sensitive person, is it really like theirs to manage, or are there things that you can do as a spouse or a parent to support and assist that person in just sort of navigating it?
Yeah, so this is such a good question. I'm glad you brought it up because it's like one of the chief complaints I hear from other HSPs, how often they're misunderstood or dismissed by those closest to them, the people that they really need to show up for them and support them.
Mm.
So, what I would recommend to those who are surrounding the sensitive people, loved ones, spouses, and so forth, to just treat it like an integral part of who they are. As much as it is like hair color, eye color, like can be part of someone's identity or how we identify them. Treating the sensitivity in the same way, again, not something to fix or expecting to change, because whether or not they can articulate it, they are benefiting in some way from that person's sensitivity even if they don't realize it. Like that's part of the reason why they were drawn to them, or they're reaping some of the benefits in some way, like the thoughtfulness of that person, the creativity, the conscientiousness, like somehow in some way that is linked to their sensitivity. So it would be very unfair to profit from their loved one's sensitivity and at the same time put them down for it, like blessing them and cursing them in the same breath. Like we don't want to do that. We want to embrace the whole person for who they are.
In a moment, I'm going to ask how people can get in touch with you. But before we get to that, what I love about the book is that you offer these scenarios where you place people, fictitious people, obviously, in different scenarios who are sensitive people, and sort of talk about either how they manage it or talk about, how it affects them negatively, because they are in such a, difficult environment. And one of my favorites is the office scene. You kind of have a scene where a bunch of people are gathered around a conference table, and there's a highly sensitive person there who's trying to speak and trying to be a part of the conversation. And people are just sort of just talking over them. And that is something I have experienced many, many, many times. And so I thought I would just get you to speak to that. What would a sensitive person do when they're in their job? They're in a setting at work where it's hard to walk away. It's hard to go find a quiet spot where you're kind of on the spot and required to be there, but still feeling all of the effects of what's going on in the room. What would you recommend for someone in that situation?
I can definitely relate to that scenario and been in it myself several times. So I would recommend some kind of grounding technique for that person because, yeah, we're often going to be in situations where there's no easy escape or we can't get up and excuse ourselves to take a breather. So grounding technique, it is just really a fancy term for anything that really helps you regulate or settle your nervous system. And it can look any number of ways. Like I know in therapy, there are the more tried and true methods, like there's box breathing, there's progressive muscle relaxation, taking turns, like alternating between muscle groups and clenching and releasing those muscles. That's something you can do pretty inconspicuously right there in your seat without people noticing. It could be as something as simple as carrying like a fidget toy if it's not too distracting. Like I know some people like to click their pen, but that can easily get annoying for other people around or signal that there's something wrong and we want to keep things discreet. So I would say anything that works for grounding the person, deep breathing, or having an item on hand that they can discreetly kind of handle or fidget without calling too much attention to themselves,
Mhm.
or and even like monitoring their internal dialogue or monologue, I guess, if you will, saying, I'm safe right now, I belong to myself, I'm okay, or everything will be okay. And just paying attention to how we're treating ourselves internally, I think, is also another good strategy.
That's so, so, so good. I love that. That's great. So the title of the book is Sensitive is Not an Expletive by Alexandra Fleit. It is available right now. You can purchase it. And we were talking a little bit earlier about like reading through it and really just taking your time with the book and allowing the concepts to sort of integrate, allowing yourself to no longer feel like you're the only one or like you're alone in this, because there's so many other people around you who are experiencing the exact same feelings. They have the exact same concerns, and so I highly recommend the book. The link will be available in the description. You can click on it right now and go right to Alexandra's Amazon page and purchase the book. But if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
So it's been on my to-do list to build a personal page like for my sensitivity brand. Haven't gotten around to it. So in the meantime, people are welcome to look me up on LinkedIn and send me a request or a direct message that way.
Fantastic. Awesome. So we'll go ahead and put that LinkedIn link on the screen. And I just know you're going to be helped by this book, whether you are a sensitive person or you have someone in your life who you love and you want to support. This is the right book for you to buy right now in order to do that more effectively starting today. So thank you so much, Alexandra. I appreciate you being with me today, and look forward to seeing everybody next time. Bye bye.